Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Q&A about the film Gender Inclusive Schools. Before I get started, I just want to thank the filmmaker, Jonathan Skurnik. This film is part of a series of his from the Youth and Gender Media Project, and we were very happy to work with him on creating this film. To move forward, before we get to your questions, what I'm going to do is share with you a framework that Gender Spectrum has for working with schools, which you will see is reflected in this film. And I just want to provide that as a backdrop to your questions because I think it will be helpful. So if you give me 1 second, I'm just going to share my screen here. And we will be ready to go. Okay. So the first order of business here is if you saw this film and loved it and thought that it would be helpful for you or your schools or groups, organizations that you work with, you can order the film. It's available through Frameline, and you can use a link on our website. The link is listed here, and we'll also send this out to you after the Q&A. But you can use this as a way to order the film for yourself. So you may have noticed that there were a number of different approaches that were taken in the school that was featured in the film. And these are 4 entry points that we talk about a lot at Gender Spectrum. There's internal, institutional, interpersonal, and instructional entry points. And all of those were evident in the school in Peralta where this was filmed. You will also get a link to, this is a framework for gender inclusive schools, a document that has an overview of all of these areas, and we'll send that out to you too if you've registered for this event. So let's start with the first entry point. The internal entry points is about working from the inside out. In order to have a deep understanding of gender as it applies to youth, it really helps to look inward and see how our own understanding of gender has an impact on our experiences and beliefs about gender and the work that we do with students or young people in other contexts. And I just want to share a couple of examples of that from the film. The teacher on the top, as she was being reflected, said, what you have to do is think about your own issues. Think about what it brings up for you. And she was really talking about, for herself, navigating as somebody who's been teaching for years, what it meant to take on some new content and a new perspective and be able to implement that in a way that would best support students. And then we have a parent at the parent meeting in the film who said, having the space of this allowed me to reflect on my own experience and come back to what we were talking about earlier around how do we support children. And in this context, he was talking about his own child who identifies as a boy and often gets mistaken for a girl. And having a parent meeting to discuss gender helped him think about how he could best support his son and also reflect on his own experiences and see how that had an impact on how he related to his son around gender. The next example is institutional entry points. And that's really the way that the school community explicitly lets it be known that they recognize and honor gender diversity and work to reflect a more complex understanding about gender. There's many ways that this can happen. It can be through policies, through forms, through things that are visible in the classroom, through things like the faculty training and professional development, through parent engagement, having gender diverse books and posters available. At the end of the film, somebody who was part of the Diversity Unity Committee talked about how what they were doing in this school is what they want for all of Peralta and really for all of the world. And you see here that the Diversity Committee defines diversity in the broadest sense, including ethnic, racial, cultural, economic, family structure, sexual orientation, gender identification, and immigration status, as well as outlook and perspective. So it's important that we're not just looking at one piece of a person's identity in isolation, that we are shining light to each of these pieces of a person's identity and understanding how they interact with each other and making it clear to students that they are supported for all of their identities. Interpersonal entry points is really about our interactions with each other and communicating in a way that states, that signals support of gender inclusive environments. These can be proactive conversations. They can also be a response to negative comments or things that can be interpreted as being negative comments. And again, two examples from the film. The first one here of a first grade student, every time this plays in the film, it gets a few chuckles because she seems so precocious, and yet it's also a reminder that very young children are really capable of understanding both concepts of gender and stereotyping and what it means to stick up for somebody. So when she was talking about someone making fun of her sister for how she dressed, she said, that's called stereotyping. Don't judge my sister like that. And that's a moment that I know a lot of people really enjoy seeing in the film. And then finally, another example came from our own Joel Baum at Gender Spectrum, and he was talking at the parents' meeting, and he talked about the importance of interrupting not only negative concepts about gender, but comments that might reinforce the binary to make it seem that there really only are these two boxes of male and female. And he said kids are in this binary system like fish are in water. They don't even know it's there. So unless we intentionally interrupt it and say we can't make those assumptions about kids, then they're going to operate that way, and that's where a lot of the bullying comes from. Again, one of the research shows us very clearly that if you address gender, if you address bullying around gender and just create a more gender inclusive climate, that improves the school climate for all students around in multiple ways. And then finally, I don't need to say much about the instructional entry points because you saw very clearly in the video what that looked like to teach lesson plans to students and integrate content into lesson plans. And I do want to say, as important as that is, and as wonderful as the lesson plans, if all of the other entry points are addressed, then the gender inclusive space, the move towards a gender inclusive space falls in, that it's really the day-to-day that's even more important than having specific lesson plans, again, as wonderful as these lesson plans are. And the other thing I want to say is that in addition to standalone lesson plans, there are ways to integrate gender inclusive content into just the everyday lesson plans that are taught in a school. And there are some more handouts that you'll receive that provide some examples of ways to do that. And with that, I want to move on to your questions. And we had one question that came in ahead of time from somebody who wasn't able to make it. And her question was, one second. Her question was, I'm a school counselor in Iowa, and I would love to have you do this kind of training in our school. Does Gender Spectrum work outside of California? The answer to that question is yes, we do work outside of California. Two things. One, I'm actually based in Boston, although Gender Spectrum is based in the Bay Area. And then the other thing is we provide training online. And if you look at our website, you can find links to learn how you can be involved in online training from us. And then also we've begun somewhat recently the Gender Inclusive Schools Network. And that's a network that where we work intensively with a school, a district within a region, or multiple schools and districts within a region, and provide training, but then have follow-up for a full year that includes more online education and really building a community of educators who can support each other, educators, administrators, community people in some case, that can support each other in creating gender inclusive climates. And another question here, this one comes from Joel. Thank you for the inspiring film. I'm a fourth grade teacher and I would like to teach those lesson plans, but I worry about the kind of reaction I would get from my school's administration. What advice do you have? So my advice around that is twofold. One is that I would say find other people in your school who may be interested in this topic. And instead of just approaching school administration alone, talk to other people. Think about how does doing this kind of work fit into the existing mission of your school? How does it fit into other school priorities? And approach your administrator with that in a very open way, assuming that your administrator will in fact see the value of this. I would also say that even if your administration isn't on board, there are ways to move forward in doing this work. That lesson plans, I think actually the picture that's, oh, I should get rid of this, shouldn't I? One second. Okay. still up here? Okay, I'm back. Although I didn't mind hiding behind that slide. But I would also say that some of the lesson plans you saw in that film, I believe, could be taught in any school in connection to Common Core standards and other priorities. Things like the lessons about crayons and no such thing as boy colors or girl colors. Those are lesson plans that you can use really without having a lot of support beyond just having it be connected to your subject area. Another question, I was amazed at how articulate the kids were in this film. Is that something you see a lot of? It's funny, I've worked on a lot of films that have young children talking about topics that adults might be surprised that they know so much about. And what we find is that if kids are given the space to have those conversations, in fact, they're a lot more articulate and observant of the world around them than we adults often give them credit for. So it's no surprise to me that the children were as articulate as they were in that film. Let's see, another question. I love seeing what this school did, and I would like my child's school to have that kind of training. They have been supportive in using the right pronouns and letters and letting her use the girls' bathroom. Maybe I should put my glasses on. And using the girls' bathroom. This is great, but I think staff and students need more education. How do I get them to take the next step and train their staff and educate other students about gender diversity? So a couple of things about that. One, I'm very glad that the school is meeting your child's need in terms of using the right pronouns and using the bathroom that she wants to use. And so that's all a really good first step. What that means to me is that it's possible to have continuing dialogue with folks in the school. And similar to my answer to the question before, I would think about what other allies you might be able to work with, and also think about maybe smaller first steps. If the school is not ready to have a full faculty training, for example, on this issue, see if maybe you can talk to the administration about having a smaller training, perhaps specifically for administrators or for school counselors or for other folks in the school who have an interest in this topic. And once they see what the content of this work is really like and what the education entails, they may see more clearly how this connects to, again, the school's priorities, the school's mission, and frankly, to academic achievement and to having a school where all students can learn and thrive. Okay. Another question here that came in before was from Jessica, who said, my administrators are resistant to gender-inclusive bathrooms for those who identify as gender nonconforming or non-binary. The student reports feeling most safe in a gender-neutral bathroom. I want to provide a safe bathroom experience for my student without singling the student out by only giving the option of the single-stall bathroom in the nurse's office. Do you have recommendations for ways to talk to my administration or what I can do to support the student? First of all, I would say, thank you for being an advocate for your student, because that's critical, that in talking to students and again, in looking at the research, just having one supportive an adult for a student makes a huge difference, not only in their school experience, but in their outcomes in many areas. So what I would say about that is that one way that some schools have successfully addressed that situation is by taking some existing single stall bathrooms, and they could be faculty bathrooms located in different parts of the school, and turning them into single stall bathrooms that any student can use. Again, there's many reasons that a student might want to use a single stall bathroom, not only transgender or gender expansive students. There could be students who have some social anxiety about using bathrooms with multiple stalls. There may be students who have some body issues and just feel uncomfortable about using bathrooms with multiple stalls. So by doing this, it's creating options for all of those students, which is very positive, and at the same time, not mandating that any one student should be relegated to just using the nurse's bathroom. Because we know when that happens, if it's a large school and somebody has to run from one part of the school to the other, it can feel very stigmatizing for a student to say, this is the only place that you can go to the bathroom. And many students report doing everything they can to not have to use the bathroom at school if that's the case. And that can lead to both physical and mental health issues, and is clearly something to be avoided. I would also point you to a gender spectrum resource, specifically an FAQ, frequently asked questions about school bathrooms. That resource we published in cooperation with the National Association of School Psychologists, National Association of School Principals, of Secondary School Principals, as well as the Association for Elementary School Principals, and the Association for School Counselors, the American School Counselors Association. And that's a great resource for just looking at kind of language that you can use when talking about it, and also providing language for administrators who may have questions from parents or other people about the use of bathrooms. Vicky said, we have chosen to label 4 single-stall bathrooms as everybody bathrooms. We found it even more inclusive than gender neutral. Is that okay? Yeah, that's not only okay, that's great. I think calling something an everybody bathroom, or just calling it a bathroom, certainly gets across that this is a place that that anyone can use. And in some ways, by taking the word gender off of the bathroom, it just makes it clear this is just a place to go in, do what you need to do in the bathroom, and then be on your way for the rest of your school day. So that's a great option. Thank you, Vicki. Jenna asked, the video was great and helpful to see. What are some of the best ways that that educators can address different cultural norms or religious beliefs? I think one of the first things to recognize is that the way that gender has been perceived is something that changes over time, both culturally and historically. And so I think one of the things that can be helpful is to have examples of how gender has been seen as non-binary across many cultures. In our trainings that we do for schools, we often talk about the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia, which is a primarily Muslim country, and it's a country where 5 genders are recognized. And closer to home, there's much language among different Native American cultures specific to non-binary genders. Some of you may have heard of the word two-spirit, but there's also a host of other language that's used for that. And then the other thing I would say is that it's important to respect where people are coming from culturally, and certainly to be able to be willing to listen and, again, keep the lens that we're looking for what's in the best interest of the child. And even when there may not be agreement about what the best interest of a child is, there's certainly research out there that supports that can be talked about, that supports the notion that children really do thrive when they're allowed to express who they are in terms of their gender. Just seeing here. Another question. I wanted to share that we created a collaboration, a gender identity support for a student, and also shared it with staff and identified allies of the student. Again, that's great. And I would also point you again to our website and say that on our website, there are forms that you can use to create a gender support plan to ensure that everybody's on board with supporting a particular student. And it's something that in a meeting with parents and with the student and with school, whoever from the school, the representative from a representative from the school can sit down together and say, this is really what this young person needs to be able to be a full participant in school life. Another question. Thank you for doing this. It's really great. There are so many good lessons in the video. Where can I recommend my daughter's educators go to see the lesson plans? We're actually in the process right now of working on some curriculum. It's not available at the moment, but we will be posting some of that on our website. And I know that there are other organizations that currently have some lesson plans on their website that you might want to check out. You can go to GLSEN's website, you can go to Welcoming Schools, a project of the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, and they have lesson plans. Teaching Tolerance from the Southern Poverty Law Center is another organization that has lesson plans. And so there are lesson plans that are out there. And again, even the lesson plans that were in this film, those weren't all lesson plans we gave them. The lesson plan, for example, where the teacher was putting 2 boxes on students' heads and talking about how limiting it would be if they had to conform to the notion of gender stereotypes that are associated with being male or female. That lesson plan was actually something that she came up with. And that's only, again, to emphasize that while the lesson plans are important, what's most important is having the school community comfortable working with students in a way that moves outside the binary and supports gender diversity. Okay, well, we have a pause here. I can go back to another question that came in before. Let me see. Nope, that's it for ones that were before. Oh, one other thing around lesson plans that I want to say is that we also have if you're not familiar with the Gender Spectrum Lounge, the Gender Spectrum Lounge is an online community with groups for educators, parents, young people, for people with all different interests. And among the educators groups, there are people who you can share lesson plans in those groups and ask people for examples of lesson plans. It's a place to put out requests, and you might want to say, I'm a 7th grade teacher and I'm looking for a social studies unit that involves X, Y, and Z. Does anybody have something like that? And if you have a lesson plan that you love that you particularly would like to share, that's a place to do that as well. Okay. And I think just one more question that just came in, which is how does the election have an impact on what's happening right now? And is that something to be concerned about? And, you know, that's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I have a few thoughts about it. Obviously, there will be some changes on the federal level, and it's something that we certainly as an organization and as a movement need to think about. But the other thing about it for me is that the progress we've made isn't going to end tomorrow, that there's still much work to be done on the state level, on the local level, and that as a result of the work of thousands of people over the last 10 years, we've seen a seismic shift in the kinds of conversations we're having about gender and even just the language around gender. And that's not going to change. The parents who are supporting their students, their kids, the schools that are supporting their students, the young people who are a driving force in this movement, none of that is going to go away, and that our responsibility now is to support those people and to keep that momentum going. And I have a quote actually over my desk that is a reminder of the importance of knowing that while things may change, the forward movement is still possible. And it's a quote by Cesar Chavez from 1984, who said, "Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore." So that, to me, seems like a good way to wrap this up today. And we will send you out some of those materials I sent you, and certainly feel free to email us at info@genderspectrum.org if you have any questions. Thanks for joining in. Bye.